Honor, it's so good to see you again.
Yeah.
Is what I would say if I hadn't
Uh-huh.
already traveled into the future where we already hung out.
Whoa! So this episode's already done?
No, we still gotta record it.
Okay, well.
All that and more on last week's episode of Podpodcastcast.
Last week's!
It's a time travel app. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Podpodcastcast. It's a podcast where we review podcasts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Honor, and this is actually last week's episode.
Yeah, it's a time.
Don't mess with the continuum, Sam. You're going to make everything explode. This is last week's.
This is last week's episode. This is a time travel episode, and you'll see why as we get into our pod for this week. But I really quickly want to say, Honor, it's great to be back with you. Listeners, if it sounds different, it's because we are finally in the same place once again.
Same room.
Yeah. Out of the woods, out of deep space.
Yeah.
Wherever we said it, lied where you
void.
were. The void.
Yeah, I made it back through the power of time travel.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I tried to delay it. But let's get into this episode. Honor, what podcast are we reviewing this week? Last week,
we are reviewing a podcast called Untrue Stories. A podcast about... I always mess up their names because they're very similar names.
Yes. So it's a podcast. This is a audio drama, a fiction podcast. And it's a strange one, listener. Let's go through the basics, and then we'll do the wrap up if anybody's already listened to it or they just want to hear us go through the play by play. Untrue Stories is a fiction podcast mostly about the authors, real life authors, H.G. Wells and George Orwell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one can only assume that they picked both of these names to be intentionally confusing.
Yes, to just be as awful as possible.
Yes. For those who are rightly confused, George Orwell was famous for, he was a novelist and political writer from England in the 20th century, very famous for writing the dystopian fiction novel 1984, which describes a future in which the world is dominated by totalitarianism. H.G. Wells, I have no idea what his deal is. He's famously the War of the Worlds guy. If you remember talking about it in like your freshman history class one time, that back in the day there was a radio play and people were like, "We're getting invaded by aliens."
Yeah,
that was H.G. Wells. And if it isn't, don't email us at podpodcastcastpod@gmail.com to correct us.
Let me look on my medium-sized machine.
This is a big machine.
Yeah, The War of the Worlds. He wrote it. He's an author. Also, one of them wrote Animal Farm. I think it was Orwell.
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
That was one.
Yeah.
So the pod is about these two guys and weird adventures they go on. Let's break the ice here. It's about time travel. It's about time travel and shenanigans. And Honor, I would have to say that I think the time travel is very clearly and tastefully done in this.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't you agree?
You know, maybe if you traveled back in time to where I'd only listened to episodes 1 and 2,
yeah,
I would agree.
This podcast is, first of all, it's very short.
Yes.
Each episode is like 15 minutes. If you're going to listen to it, go ahead, and I would recommend listening to the Omnibus. There's an episode called Omnibus. If you're a comics fan, you'll know what that means. It's just all of the episodes pushed together, so you don't have to keep like selecting a new episode every time.
Mm-hmm.
You can just listen to the Omnibus. This podcast is, I would say, intentionally confusing.
Yeah, I would hope it's intentional.
Yes. No.
That's how I feel.
I think
I can't tell all the time.
I think it definitely is. So ultimately, this podcast is kind of a spoof on time travel stories in how when you introduce this science fiction element of moving around like a timeline and like a chronology of events, nothing makes sense anymore.
Yeah.
And the events, like, by themselves are pretty weird. Like, the decisions that characters make and the characters themselves are strange.
Yeah.
And for some people, I think that might be really delightful.
Yes.
Certainly there are many funny moments, but this is a confusing podcast. It is almost so non-linear and strange that I feel like it might be the person who usually listens to podcasts for audio dramas. I almost think that they may not like this podcast.
I think that could be fair. In my own experience, I felt like after a certain point, it gets confusing to the point that I was like, I can't keep everything straight. So I should just give up on that. And then it just went back to being funny.
Right.
And that's what you should do. Don't try. Don't attempt. It doesn't make sense.
I think you could if you, like, sat down. Like, if you got out your chalk that you've had since third grade and started drawing on your driveway, if you had enough physical space to map out what was happening, I think it's possible to understand.
Get the cork board and red string.
Yeah.
Tie everything together. Maybe you could do it.
Maybe.
I didn't feel like doing all that, so I gave up and had fun.
I think that's probably the way that this was kind of intended to be experienced. I think this podcast relishes in that, and they're like, what? You can't keep up?
Yeah.
We're just at like 30,000 AD or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Whatever nonsense there is like that.
Uh-huh.
Before we hop into it, this is kind of the spoiler-free section. I would say if you this is an alright pod. If you're looking for something to, if you like some weird sci-fi or you want a funny audio drama, I say go give this one a check out before we start talking about what happens in it. Yeah, I'd say more if you want something that's like kind of quick-paced and witty and funny. Yes. If you're there for like sci-fi, probably not the one. You should be there if you want to hear like two British authors like debate about how to make tea the right way for just a really long time comparatively, because this is a short podcast. I think that they're doing a great job. Yeah. As somebody who's also persnickety, I think that they argue for a reasonable amount of time. Yeah. Ani, you ready to kind of jump into the pod? Yeah, let's do it. Perf. Did I just unironically say perf? Yeah. What is probably happening? Because I've been saying perf. And it's like an infection. So let's just jump right into the episodes, because we both just want to talk about how crazy this podcast is. Yes. If the people who didn't want to be spoiled have left, then let's gloves off. Yeah. This podcast is absolutely insane. Yeah. It was kind of a strange thing, because I recommended this to you. Well, after I started listening to it, because I was looking for an audio drama, and I saw this online. I was like, oh, this seems somewhat interesting, and it is really strange. Yeah. So, the first episode, called A Nice Cup of Tea, if you're on the omnibus, you'll never see these titles, and that's totally fine. You don't need them at all. Yeah. The first episode is George Orwell entering this cabin, abode, condo, whatever. Cottage, thank you. Scottish cottage. Oh, that's sad. The first episode is George Orwell entering this cottage that he's rented in the remote islands of Scotland from some lady. And she's like, oh, Mr. Orwell, I hope you can help finish your novel here. And he's like, I will, ma'am. You know, this kind of, he's not Scottish, so he doesn't sound like that. No. But you kind of get the sense he's a little this crotchety old guy, and he's come out here to be alone and to finish his groundbreaking novel, 1984. Whoa. So he sits down, and then almost immediately, fellow author H.G. Wells enters. And Orwell says to Wells, what the heck you doing here, Brohim? And Wells says, I've rented out this cottage. What are you doing here, Home Slice? And the lady comes back and she's like, I've rented it out to both of you. Now get along now, little
Yeah.
doggies.
Yep.
And so these characters that I don't even know if they ever met, because Wells would have been very old by the time that this is set, which is 1948. Another little weird slice of
Yeah.
like lore that they put in is that this is 1948. Famously, the book is 1984. Yada yada.
Which is weird because isn't Wells like sounds like the younger one of the two of them?
He's definitely not though. But
he's not.
Yeah, War of the Worlds comes out early 20th century, maybe 1800 something.
Yeah.
I
So
don't
they
know.
just moved him in like.
I mean, we could get on the Wikipedia and find out when H.G. Wells died, but did you come here for a well-researched podcast?
No.
That's a joke, listener. We do a lot of research. We are...
Professionals.
Yeah, so we're a little fuzzy on the details on who is doing what in the real world, but it doesn't matter.
This
matter.
is an untrue story.
Untrue story, as they say at every episode. And so, what you immediately get a sense of is that the writer loves, like, literary fiction, like, classic fiction sci-fi.
Yeah.
Because you can immediately feel there's so much voice put into both Wells and Orwell.
Yeah.
And they immediately hate each other.
It's awesome.
It's a really great dynamic.
They're just at each other's throats immediately. And it's really great to have, like, a guy who's kind of, like, just you're a crotchety old dude.
Orwell.
And then the crotchety old dude just has so much more vitriol about it. And is like, you don't know anything.
It is true. It is true. As I tried to do a impression of George Orwell for Honor before the podcast started, if you try to do an impression of George Orwell, you'll find what I found, which is that he sounds like an old wizard.
Yeah.
So he's just kind of crotchety character, and H.G. Wells is older but somehow more whimsical.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I say that the writer of this podcast does a really good job at like imbuing them with such voice, because you can hear them reference what they talk about or reference what they wrote about in the real world, and also kind of take it to the like extreme. So they talk about a lot about how Wells is kind of this utopian, this dreamer, right? He's like, we shall advance the technology, and then we'll have spaceships and thingamawizes, you know?
Yeah.
And having, like you said, this dichotomy between a crotchety old guy and an older, but like more optimistic, silly guy is truly beautiful.
Yeah.
So the first episode, you're right, they spent a long time talking about how to make tea and what is the best way to make tea. Orwell published an essay about like the 12 steps, the 12 classifications before something is truly actually tea.
I think it was 9.
Was it 9?
Yeah.
I thought it was 12.
Do your research.
You're making me go.
He's gonna get on this little machine now.
We were both wrong, but I was more correct. It's 11 rules.
Ugh. Okay, but I picked an odd number, which I think is more correct.
We're gonna need to take you back to math school. But so they get in this argument about tea. I have a banana in my pocket.
Why do you have that? Also, listener, it's like the most brown banana I've ever seen.
It was fine when I got it out of the car.
What? It is almost... I don't know if you could say that's yellow.
There's yellow parts to it.
Barely.
Well, yeah, but it was a lot better before I put it in the pocket.
Why is it there?
In case I got hungry.
Sure.
So the guys argue about tea.
Yeah. And then is it just like in that conversation that Wells is like, oh yeah, I invented time travel?
Yeah, what's the like why? They make a bet, but
it's just...
What's the bet about?
Oh, it's that... Okay, so Orwell is writing 1984.
This is correct.
And so he's like, this is what the year will be like. And then Wells is like, I can go check.
Incorrect.
What?
Time out.
Eventually they get to that point where Wells is like,
no.
I'll just go see.
That not correct.
That happens.
No, okay, I remember
talks
that.
about this.
I remember. Okay. So the guys argue about tea for like a long time,
Yeah.
right? And eventually they just kind of like grumble at each other or whatever. The tea is done. It's established that no one makes tea like George Orwell in the way that he likes it. Later, they're talking, and casually H.G. Wells drops, "I've made a time machine. It's a bicycle and it can go through time."
Yeah.
And George Orwell's like, "I don't believe you. You're a crazy old man." And H.G. Wells is like, "I'll prove it to ya," right?
Yeah.
And so the bet is, can H.G. Wells travel through time?
Mm-hmm.
As proof of him traveling through time,
Yes.
he will go exactly 1 week into the future
Mm-hmm.
and bring Orwell his cup of tea that he's made, because that's proof that there could be no duplicate cup, because no one can make it like him.
And it will still be warm.
Yeah. Perfect.
That is what happens, but the reason that he's just casually like, "Oh, yeah, I have a time machine," is because they're talking about 1984.
Okay.
And he's like, "Oh, I mean, I could just go check."
Yeah.
And then he's like, "I don't believe you." And he's like, "Well, I'll prove it."
Yeah.
By going a week into the future with a cup of your tea.
First, we'll do this bet.
Yeah.
Boom. Episode 1. Immediately, insane start to this.
Yes.
It's great. The characters are both very witty. Yeah. I love the writer in this.
Yes.
They do a great job. Most people in this podcast are very well acted. I just want to give a quick shout out to Robin Johnson, who plays George Orwell, and Patrick Spragg, who plays H.G. Wells. I don't immediately see who the writer of this podcast is. I would love to know. It might be the guy who plays Orwell. I can't remember the what it says at the end of the podcast right now. Fantastic job. I love the people who write this podcast.
The writing is good.
Oh, that's excellent. Episode 1. I keep forgetting about this banana. Episode 2. Wells goes into the future, but oh no, he's gone too far into the future. He didn't go 1 week. He went to...
Is it 1984 or did he go past it?
I think he went to 1984.
But that's also what I thought, but...
I just wanted to keep looking at you for a while. This banana's getting mushy.
Take it out of your pocket.
Well, where am I supposed to
put it? On the table.
It's so brown.
It is.
I wanted to eat it. So H.G. Wells arrives in 1984, where he flops into the cottage that he left in 1948 and meets a girl named Julia.
Yeah.
Well, we find out pretty quickly that Julia is Orwell's granddaughter.
Yeah.
And that we are living in the future of the book 1984.
Yes.
Everything.
Oh, important note. So when Orwell in this podcast starts talking about his book, 1984, he's describing actual 1984. He's like, it'll be like crazy and like disco and everything. So then when Wells goes to the future, it's the one from the real book that got written that is authoritarian and crazy.
Let's take a quick dive into the book 1984, because you should understand this before you listen to this podcast, or at least it's pretty helpful.
Yeah.
The book 1984 by George Orwell is the dystopian fiction.
Yep.
Where the world is all controlled by totalitarian governments. 3 of them exactly. One that controls Oceania, which is the Americas, plus Britain, maybe plus other places. And then there's Russia and China, which also control other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. These powers are locked in an internal war. And the art of propaganda has been so thoroughly mastered by these states that they have almost like full control over how their populations like feel and think. Mm-hmm. So, Honor, I'm half surprised that you haven't read 1984, because I think you would really dig it because it's terrible and awful.
Yeah,
not the book.
I really should.
Yeah, but the setting's real bad. The premise of the book is that it's about like one guy in Britain, because of course it's in Britain.
Yeah,
and like there's a plot, but it's mostly like just George Orwell laying out, I think totalitarianism is bad. Let's not do it, pretty please.
Yeah.
So, the state is run by a party called INSOC or IGSOC or something. And they have invented like new forms of propaganda. And some of the things that George Orwell, the real guy, coined in this book, like, are words that we use in real life. Things like doublethink, which I forget what it means in the world. It's like to like hold totally opposite ideas together as if both were true. And newspeak, which is in the book, the party creates like a new way to use that the English language should be to restrict how people think. And so they can't like think rebellious thoughts. And they also, it shows up in this podcast that they have like prison camps and they call them like happy homes or something like that.
Yeah.
And famously the term Big Brother.
Yes.
Supposedly the party is run by a guy named Big Brother who is on posters and banners everywhere. You know, like Big Brother's watching, which is supposed to be like, we're here for you. The state's going to take care of you, but is also, as you the reader understand, I'm going to surveil you and make sure your life is bad. So that's what the book 1984 is about. Back to the podcast. We're in that world.
Yeah.
Wells travels to 1984 and he's in this dystopia where there are thought police and there is INSOC and they're ready to zap you with laser things. I don't remember.
Yeah. Laser things, generally speaking. And
as Anna pointed out, this is all because in the podcast Untrue Stories,
yes,
George Orwell wrote a novel 1984.
Yeah.
Which is essentially about the real life 1984.
Yeah. It's about capitalism instead of totalitarianism.
Yes, and consumerism and like rampant greed.
Yeah.
So you kind of need to understand that because this is really confusing.
Yeah.
And it's going to keep being confusing.
I mean, to be fair, I haven't read the book. I just know vaguely of it. Like, even less than you just explained. And I was able to follow that fine. I was like, yeah, I know this is a book about a dystopian, totalitarian future. And instead he's writing about, like skating and, like, discos.
Okay, so maybe you don't need all that background. I just felt like it would have been really confusing. So, episode 2, Wells goes into the future, meets Julia, George Orwell's granddaughter. The thought police immediately arrive because they're like, little man on the bicycle, something you're not registered with your brain number.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh no, I gotta get back to the past now, don't I?
Yep.
And Julia's like, this is all totally messed up. This future blows. I hate it. I have to wear government-mandated overalls.
Yep.
Which could be a great look, I have to say. But
yeah.
She's like, Wells, I'm taking your bike. And he's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
It's only got room enough for one of us. And she's like, I'm taking your bike. I'm going to go back in the past and convince my grandpa to write a cautionary tale about this dystopia. And he's like, oh no. And she takes it. She's like, I'm going to leave it for you in the closet. He goes over to the closet. He's like, okay, the bike is there. Boom. I've got the bike. I'm also going to go into the past. And the thought police are like, don't do it.
Oh.
We'll shoot. And he's like, oh, yep, sorry. I'm just going to cycle over to the other side of the room.
And then he time travels.
End of episode. Also, just to note, this episode features the first appearance of one of my favorite characters in the entire podcast, which is the SWAT team member who always breaks the window. Did you pay attention to this guy?
No,
what do you mean? Oh my god! Every time there's like a cop scene in this show, which there are quite a few of, there's a window breaking sound and a guy going, "Oh, sorry," or no, or they'll be like, "Dude, you didn't even need to go through the window." And he's like, "It's fun though," you know. Every time, and it's my favorite thing.
That is awesome.
Later it happens, and it just makes me smile so much that there's the sound of all the guys going in. Ho, 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 ho. The scene, all the guys leave. Ho, 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 ho. Oh, wait a minute. Ka-ching! It goes back and breaks the window. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like it's taking us longer to talk about these episodes than the episodes are, but I feel
a little bit.
This podcast is less concerned with making a coherent story than I feel that I am.
Yeah.
I have to go back to my
That is true.
Episode 3.
Episode 3. They are back in the past, except Wells is like, hey, so here's what happens when you leave a bike in a closet for like, I don't know, 60 years, however many years do I... 40? I'm stupid. Don't do it. Man, okay, it was like 40 years. But he's like, this bike is broken now because you just left it in a closet for years.
And Julia's like,
so
bruh, I don't care.
It took me forever because I was just like pinging around through space-time, like fixing parts, until I could get back. And she's like, well, too bad, so sad. So I need you to write a manuscript in 6 hours to swap out with my grandfather's, so that instead of, basically she's like, whatever future he writes about will be the one that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to actually write the like actual 1984 that we have in our real world, so that it switches the futures.
Right, the real novel.
Yes,
not the real future, but the real novel.
The real novel that
so
we
that
have.
It doesn't happen.
Yes.
And we do end up in a consumer's hellscape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's like, okay, go write for 6 hours straight. Bye. And then he does. And they swap it out. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to go take it to the post so it can get published. Wow. I have no idea that this has been switched.
That's what like, Orwell cool. says, yes.
That's what Orwell says. He's got no idea. And then they're like, okay, the continuum's about to shift because we've changed the future. And then Julia's like, my hair's green now and all my clothes are torn, and
yeah, she becomes kind of kind of punk rock the way you describe her.
Yeah. And so then, for us, that's normal. Mm-hmm. That's how punk rockers look. Mm-hmm. They're like, clearly we've changed the future wrong, and now it's a nuclear like warscape.
Yes, they're like, oh my gosh, Julia, you're mutated. Yes. Your hair is green.
They're like, you've been living in radiation. So then they're like, well, guess the totalitarianism was better.
Which is awesome.
So we need to change it back. But then I think they just say, like, we need to change it back, and then the cop is like, there's a cop now.
I gotta break in. I gotta break in.
You're better at this
because we skipped over the best character of this entire show.
We did!
Sonny Walkman.
Sonny Walkman!
Sonny Walkman is a Sony Walkman.
Yeah.
And it's, it's just a Walkman. It's just a little, disc tray. And they're like, oh my God, Julia, you have a robot head on your belt.
Just the head of a robot.
Which is so sick. And it's great because Wells is like, I can fix him up with parts I got from the future during my travails.
Yeah.
And so he gives him, and he's like, clearly what he needs is a hyper-intelligent mind. So I'm just going to slot that in there, which is like, okay, if you can do that, anything's a robot. I don't know what you're like, oh yes. No, he's just a defunct robot. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then you just get to, it's Bumblebee. It's Bumblebee from Transformers.
Yeah. Yes, which is the best way for a robot to be, is to be Bumblebee.
It's just a bit of like, I speak through song, from the radio.
Hello?
Oh my gosh, I forget
that. It's me you're looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how he greets everyone. It's
hello?
Just, hello?
It's so good. It's so good. I don't know if they just had, like, the writers had a knowledge of all the songs they wanted to use, or if they had to look through for, like, the specific line they wanted. But every time, it's so perfect, and it's from some iconic song.
Yeah, it is all from songs that you, like, recognize.
It's so good when he's like, who are you? And it's just like, yes! Beautiful! I love you, Sonny Walkman.
I love you, Sonny Walkman.
Yeah, this is not... We don't really hear that much from Sonny Walkman in this episode, but we will learn more in the future.
Exists.
He's around. So, George Orwell goes out to mail his manuscript. His manuscript gets blown into a tree, and there is the thought police person from the last episode who is there, and she's like, Mr. Orwell, let me help you put your manuscript together.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, okay. And then they go back into the cottage where the thought police person comes back, and Julia and Wells are like, oh no, how are you here? And she's like, actually, INSOC has now, because of your technology, we now own the timeline. We can travel through time too. Whoop whoop! And we're doing totalitarianism everywhere. We've even got it starting as early as like 1922.
Yeah. They're just like, we're slowly expanding backward through time until we own everything.
Which is stupid and awesome.
Yes.
Then there comes a guy in an iron lung, which makes me question what an iron lung is. But
I don't think it's an iron lung.
I thought it was
I think that's the bit. Is that they keep calling it an iron lung, and it's not.
I think it's an iron lung.
Because an iron lung is...
You should look up iron lung.
Getting on my machine.
Teach me, Hoss.
Iron lung.
Because I thought it was the thing that they had, like, for people to breathe before they could breathe.
The patient's body used for administering the lung. Still, I don't think it was actually an iron lung. Because also, like, his voice is different.
Yeah, it does. So they describe this guy showing up in an iron lung, but it also seems like they can't see him. I imagine it as some...
I think he's just, like, in a metal, like, thing.
pot. That's what I imagined. I imagined he was cooking in a little pot where you couldn't see him.
Yeah, and then they're, like, iron lung? Sure.
Maybe they meant iron lung.
Actually, because isn't it, like, it's, like, the old woman who rented them the cottage that's like, oh, there's a man in an iron lung in there. And it's like, you don't know what an iron lung is.
I don't know. A man appears, and they're like, what's going on? And he's like, I'm here with the thought police, and I will explain everything. But first, let me tell you this long, convoluted tale that will take, like, the next 3 episodes.
It takes the, like, entire rest of the podcast.
It does. So.
This is when things get confusing.
Yes. So, you learn that this man, the Iron Lung, is George Orwell from the future. Who is Big Brother?
Yes.
The supposed leader of INSOC.
Mm-hmm.
So, in episode 4, it details how... I forget exactly why, but George Orwell becomes so obsessed with being right that he's like, no one listens to me. Yeah. So I will overthrow the government.
Yeah. He's like, I'm gonna make the totalitarian government that I predicted true. Because I want to be right.
Yes. And so he gets kind of a who's who of 19th century, or of 20th century dystopian fiction writers together.
Speculative fiction.
Thank you. To be like, you guys should help me overthrow the government of the United Kingdom and then the world in order to prove that we're all right and everyone should listen to us.
Yes.
And all these writers are like, it's like Ray Bradbury, Margaret Atwood, and they're like, why would we do that? We don't want these things to happen. And it's like, yeah, okay. But you can either... What is it? The pitch is...
Yeah, I know exactly the lines you're talking about. Where he's like, either you can, you know, let the world be how it is, which is not like your dystopia that you predicted, or you can
be right.
You can be right. You can, like, have the joy of hearing people be like, you got it.
We should have listened.
Yes.
And so this episode details how this group of speculative fiction writers goes about overthrowing the government.
Yeah.
They get blackmail on, like, all future leaders of the United Kingdom because they, like, spend a couple crazy weekends at Cambridge.
Yeah.
They get, like, really intertwined with, like, powerful political groups. And then they do it. And, and then they overthrow... They get elected. They win an election where they're like, we will destroy democracy. And everyone's like, yeah! And that's what they do. They get elected and then they overthrow democracy and they install the thought police and everything is bad.
Uh-huh.
And they talk about this strange line that it seems that the writer of this podcast is particularly interested in. Basically, that they are going to be... How do they say, like, totalitarianism is a boot stamping on your face over and over again, but you're happy about it, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it just details how this weird group of writers that you have heard a little bit about in middle school overthrew the government, and then immediately they like go to betray each other.
Yeah.
They're like, we'll lower the chocolate rations. And then Ray Bradbury's like, yeah, but I'll take them all now.
And then he like pulls a gun.
Yeah, he's like, now step aside. This is a coup d'etat. And so Orwell, who had been the head, gets overthrown by Bradbury, who gets overthrown by Attenwood, and very quickly this...
Atwood. It's not Attenwood.
What?
Atwood.
So her name's Wood? Are you just adding her on like Discord? I don't understand.
Yeah.
So they're overthrown by Margaret Attenwood, and so it goes from this military junta to just one ruler, and it's kind of unclear which. I think it's Margaret Atwood, who just is like, I'm actually the one who's really in charge. Orwell, I'm going to go banish you to this island. And as he's getting flown out to this island on this helicopter, he gets put in the same helicopter as one H.G. Wells. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Wow.
How did he get here?
We don't know, and won't for a while.
Yeah.
Then, episode 5, we flash to that period of time that we talked about where Wells spent like a super long period of time with this broken bicycle hopping between different periods in time. And at this point, he's in like 30,000 in the future. Something like that. Really far in the future.
I didn't realize that this was set when his bicycle was like broken, like that first time. It was confusing, the transition into that.
Oh, this was confusing? Like, Honor, this was confusing to you?
It was confusing? What? Why would this be confusing? So I was just like, I guess he's like hopping around again for a different reason. This was the part of the show where I gave up on trying to make sense of it.
It's very unclear because the last episode ends with Orwell being thrown out of his own dictatorship, meeting up again with Wells, who's in his helicopter for some reason, and then now we're with Wells, who's in the far future. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but you gotta roll with it and hope it'll be explained. Wells ends up in the far future, meets Julia, who Julia's now old. I was like, Julia, what's going on? And she's like, we're in the future. And she explains a bit to him. She's like, oh, by the way, I've given you paralysis tea. And he's like, what? While he's paralyzed, a big blue man comes in the room and he's like, hello, I would like the flux capacitor or whatever the hell it's supposed to be. And Julia's like, yeah, here, take the thing from his magic bike. And the blue guy's like, great. Also, can I eat him? And she's like, no, you mayn't. And he's like, but I like to eat flesh. And she's like, no, you're not allowed. He's like, oh, shucks. And then Wells is like, Julia, why did you do this? What's going on? And Julia's like, okay, here's the sitch. We're in the far future. There's these guys called Morgoth Barbadoogs or whatever they're called. Morlocks.
Okay, and that was confusing to me because it's never really explained. But apparently it is a fictional species H.G. Wells wrote about.
What? I didn't know that.
I'm looking it up right now because I was like, oh, I don't understand why they're there because the Morlock just kind of references that, like, oh yeah, humanity evolved into 2 subspecies. It's like, why did that happen? And also in like not that long a period of time, how did this occur? I don't know. But they're a fictional species that H.G. Wells wrote about in his novel The Time Machine. Whoa!
This is craziness. I did not know this was from him at all.
I didn't either until I looked it up.
Well, it doesn't seem like Wells, the character in this podcast, knows about them.
No.
So Julie explains that humanity in this far future has evolved into these two subspecies. One of them is Morlocks, and Morlocks are these blue men who are cannibals. They like to eat humans,
but are also good mechanics.
Yeah, good
just
on
for
them.
Fun.
Well, yeah, you gotta have a trade.
Yeah.
And she's like, I've given them the flux capacitor whatchamazizit to do the time machine because they won it in their war against the Hicklebobs or whatever they're called. But they're actually going to fix it because they're great mechanics, and then we're going to steal it back. And he's like, we? She's like, yeah, you, me, and Sonny Walkman. And I'm like, yes! My boy!
Sonny Walkman, he goes, hello.
Sonny Walkman now has a full body.
Yep.
He goes ka-chunka chunka as he walks around. He's my favorite guy in the whole dang world. And he's not stealthy at all. They're like, we've got to go break into this fort.
Mm-hmm.
And they do. It's so beautiful. They're going around and they're like, shh. And he's like, I'ma be quiet. Or whatever.
Yeah.
They get the flux capacitor back. They're leaving. Wells says something really loudly. And then the whole jig is up. And all of the...
It's Sonny that says something loudly.
Is that right?
It? Or no, it's that they put a bell on the bike and Wells rings it. That's the only reason this happens.
Yeah. Wells rings the bell that's on the bike, wakes up all the sleeping, man-eating Morlocks. Mm-hmm. And they're like, we gotta get out of here. And Wells and Julie escapes, but the best boy in the whole wide world, Sonny Walkman,
gets captured and eaten. But here's what doesn't make sense. Why would they eat him if he's a robot?
'Cause he's cool!
They don't explain that at all. And I'm like, you just killed off the best character in this podcast for a reason that doesn't make sense.
I had no problem with that because the Morlocks are evil. And Sonny Walkman is pure good. And naturally they would want to destroy him. Yeah. Deeply disheartening.
Yeah.
Episode 5, best episode. I'm coming out and saying it, because that's the most Sonny Walkman we get.
That's very true.
Then, we get to episode 6, which is basically the last of the season.
We go back to that dang cottage. And it's like everyone's there now. It's like Avengers Endgame.
Yeah.
Everyone's just there. It's like, okay, H.G. Wells is back from the future, so now there's 2 Wells.
There's 2 Wells, plus a Morlock.
Yeah, because Julie was like, you gotta bring something back with you to fix everything, and he's like, what is that thing? And she's like, this Morlock that's chasing you right now. Start pedaling. And then he does. And so it's a double of H.G. Wells and a Morlock that go inside. Also, for whatever reason, they're like, oh, there's 2 of George Orwell. Just for fun?
No. There's 2 H.G. Wells.
Yes.
Oh,
and
no,
then
there are 2.
Also, like...
There are 2.
There's 2 Orwells.
There's 2 Orwells. There's the young one and there's the Iron Lung one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because then there's 2 in the Iron Lung.
No, I think that's 1 Orwell and 1 Wells.
What?
It
gets extremely confusing.
It gets extremely...
There's a lot of duplicates, but guess what Morlocks do?
Eat people. Okay, hold on.
They eat people.
let's roll it back. So, this episode, we go back into the room where we had this whole discussion flashback thing started.
Yes.
Where we have, as best we can understand.
And it's so hard to understand because when you're in a podcast and there's duplicates of people,
it's true.
It's just the same.
It's very confusing. There's young George Orwell, young H.G. Wells, George Orwell's daughter Julia, the thought police officer, old George Orwell in the Iron Lung.
I believe a second old George Orwell that they don't explain, but it's just like, because they're like,
I think it's another.
There's not enough room for us in this Iron Lung.
Me and Honor disagree on this one. It could be another George Orwell, or it could be another H.G. Wells.
There's just another unexplained person.
There's 2 people in the Iron Lung, and then shows up H.G. Wells again
Yes.
with the Morlock.
And they have him put on a hat to differentiate which one is which doesn't help the audio.
It's so awesome. It's so good.
It's crazy. And then...
I honestly have no idea what else happens in this episode.
So then the Morlock starts eating the duplicates of people.
You say eating the duplicates of people. While the camera looks away, he eats one of the H.G.
Yes.
Wells, but we don't know which.
Yeah. It's the one with the hat.
Is it the one with the hat?
It's
But we
the
don't know
with
which
the
one
hat.
that
We don't know
was.
which one the one with
Yeah.
the hat is, but it was the one with the hat. Yeah, and then they just are kind of like all of these things that you don't understand how they happened. We're just gonna start putting people back in time to like make those things happen.
Yes. So there's kind of, I think, this consensus that INSOC is bad and that they're going to have to go back in time to fix all of the badness.
Mm-hmm.
They also...
Unclear.
Oh,
TBH.
when does... There's a point where George Orwell... Oh, it's a mini episode, I think, where he goes to one of his prison camps.
Yep.
To talk to someone.
It's the guy who wrote about robots.
He says robots, and I like that.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. There's a writer who won't join him, who is a utopian.
Yeah.
And she... I love her. It's Le Guin. What the hell? Ursula. It's Ursula Le Guin.
Yeah.
Who wrote the Wizard of Earthsea series. By the way, awesome. I love that book series so much. Anyway, she had a really dumb line in real life, which is like, for people to know that she wrote a utopia where it's like people work hard because there's one person in suffering, and she stays behind in Orwell's terrible future to be the person that's suffering while there's utopian society building on Mars. And so at the end of this episode, the Mars people come back.
They just are like, hey, there's people on Mars.
There's people on Mars, and they have a UFO.
Yeah.
And she's like...
They just show up.
I don't know. Oh, but Ursula Le Guin travels back with them in the Iron Line. It's very confusing.
It just...
I cannot describe what happened. It's so ridiculous.
We can't get to a, like, satisfying end to be like, and here's the podcast, because what even happened? I listened to this... like 2 hours ago.
Yes.
I listened to the last episode. I couldn't tell you how it ended.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It is like, oh, there's a UFO now. And, like, we're sending people back in time to, like, make the continuum make sense. But, like, how did you get to these places? And it's crazy. Just all around, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. You have to give up on that. And it's inconclusive, and it's only season 1, but season 1 came out 2 years ago, and there's no more. There's a Halloween special I didn't listen to.
Halloween special is actually... You would have liked the Halloween special.
I need to listen to it, but...
Yeah, it's... So, let's talk about this. We've gone over the plot. It's pretty incoherent.
Yeah.
Listener, if you can make any sense out of what we're saying, you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
This podcast is incoherent, I think is the right word.
Yes, correct.
I feel like the writers were like, we want to write a thing about time travel. We like a bunch of authors.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and
let's do that.
Just slap all that together.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it's a pretty pleasurable experience.
It's
Do you
fun.
agree with me on that?
Yeah. So I think the main thing that happened is they start off, and it's just kind of these old guys who are, like, getting at each other. So the, like, tempo of this podcast starts off real, like, quick and witty and snappy.
Yes.
They then start doing time travel.
Right.
Which is like, all right, we're zipping around, quick, snappy. They keep up that pace.
Yeah.
They're now doing flashbacks, which get confusing so easily. Immediately. They don't have... If they just have, like, an audio cue to be like, and we're switching to a different... Because sometimes it's not even, like, the conversation pauses. They just flip between, this is what's happening in the past, and these are the people telling the story, and there's just nothing in between.
I don't know, does it even happen that fast?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Because I would have to rewind and be like, wait, was that Orwell from the past or Orwell from the present saying that? So that starts to get confusing because they don't let up their pace. And, like, the actual time travel is happening that confuses things. Because if you're gonna do time travel and, like, jumping back and forth to be like, this is a person describing what's happening in the past, that gets really confusing.
It's madness, yeah.
So, just, they keep up the same pace the whole time, which keeps things funny, and, like, there's good writing, and that's enjoyable. Does make it so confusing.
I think you're completely right. Like 100p on this one.
Yeah.
I really love that in episode 3, they're like, all right, I'm George Orwell from the future, and I've come to explain things. Now let me tell you why everything's real crazy in this time travel stuff. And then everything gets way more insane immediately.
He goes to explain things and just makes things more confusing. That is what happens.
Yes.
Especially, so, particularly in podcasts, or just like audio storytelling in general, you don't have the physicality, so it becomes very easy for a listener to lose, like, where the setting is. So when you start jumping around in, like, this is a story that's being told, but, we're not having the character narrate it for you, we're having, like, the audio from that, but, like, that's not actually where the action is, that's, like, what already happened. It becomes difficult for the listener to, like, stay grounded in, like, where the story is.
Oh, for sure.
Because it becomes really easy to just, like, lose that connection, and then it's like, what's going on?
I think that's really what the writers wanted to play around with, which was like, let's make a time travel thing, but let's really just get wild with it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not an entirely novel take, but I think they do it in a really good way that I feel like I know that this is what you were doing. You were doing this intentionally to make this weird and to make it, like, hard to understand.
I would hope. I don't know if I feel as confident as you.
100%.
That, like, they were doing it on purpose. I think there were definitely parts where it's like, oh, you didn't mean for me to be completely lost as to whether we're in the past or present right now.
Yeah.
But for sure, it's like, they were having fun, and you can just tell in a story when it's like, the author's just writing whatever, like, makes them smile.
Right, yes.
And so it does just have that infectious energy of, like, you're having a good time, so listening to this is a good time.
Right. I think that you're right that they don't always kind of hold the audience's hand and be like, okay, so this is what we're doing, this is where we're headed, this is what's happening. It's like, it really is like, they're holding down their hat and they're going as fast as they can. They're like, if you can keep up, good job.
Yeah.
I'm going to put in a bunch of funny references to things I like, and I'm going to talk about a bunch of really strange things and ideas.
Yeah.
If you don't know what's up, sucks to suck. Like,
yeah, you're not the intended audience, I guess.
Yeah, and I think while it is confusing, it does. I had many moments where I'm like, this is really funny, and many moments of like, where I audibly would go, what?
Yes. That's the experience listening to this. But also, it's not that long.
It's such a whirlwind. It's an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah. It's like, you're in there, it's crazy, but it's not like I'm dragging you along for 80 hours of a confusing podcast.
Yes.
It's like, are you ready to have a wild time?
You will
Perfect. Now go get lunch.
Absolutely. You can listen to this on your car ride, like to and from work in one day, and you'll be like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that it's been 2 years.
Yep.
Is that what? When did it?
Yeah, because I was trying to be like, are they gonna be releasing a season 2? And then I was like, I don't see any updates at all.
Yeah. Man, so yeah, I didn't realize it was 2 years old and it's just season 1. I really hope they come back and finish this.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they do not come back through season 2 and they're like, and just wait for season 3. Because this whirlwind, really fast, hold on to your butt kind of attitude is not, you cannot draw this out very long. And they think they've done a good job of it so far, but I don't think they should try to draw this out much longer.
No. They need to go to whatever's happening on Mars, because I don't know what's happening on Mars.
I don't know they even, I think...
that's it. That's the only... They should be done after that.
I think they could have wrapped this up in one more episode. So it makes me nervous to what they're going to try next. But I really like all the characters they've written. They're weird and strange. I like, that they've got a very specific way they want to tell a story that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we covered everything that's in the omnibus, and then there's one episode after that, which is called episode 7, or it's like the Halloween special, which is also pretty fun. It doesn't really move the needle that much more for me. I truly enjoy. They add more authors to the mix.
Awesome.
They add the author of Frankenstein, a woman who I cannot, Carrie Shelley Carey, something like that. And then
I know this one.
And
Mary Shelley. And they got Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe. I'm looking at the episode.
It's really good. And
I have to listen to that one.
It's so good. Again, I feel like they know these people really well, because there's a great line. So H.P. Lovecraft, like the father of cosmic horror, famously a very racist man.
Yeah.
And I really, really enjoy George Orwell. The only book I've ever read of George Orwell's it's called An Homage to Catalonia, which is a memoir about his time serving in the Spanish Civil War. Anyway, there's a great line in there that was made just for me. It's like, I went to Catalonia to kill fascists like this guy. And I'm like, that's true. He did do that. I like that. That's a good reference.
That's good. I like that.
Anyway, I think this podcast does a really good job of knowing the characters it wants to tell stories about, making references that people who know these real authors would enjoy. And they also do a really good job at writing, just like you say, witty banter. Just people arguing and being like, no, you're stupid. They do a great job at it. So if you want a podcast and it makes sense, this is not a podcast for you.
No.
But if you want a podcast and you're like, this is just a wild ride, and I'm like down to be taken wherever the author wants to go, and if you just want a podcast for like an hour and 45 minutes, I say go for it. Yeah. You know what I mean? If you're like, let's put a little variety into my rotation. Yeah. I would say Untrue Stories is a good pod.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need a thing to listen to that's like fun and entertaining, but isn't gonna like consume your brain for like any time after that. It won't do that. You'll listen to it, you'll have fun, and you'll move on with your life. And every now and then you'll go, remember that podcast that was just crazy?
It's really a podcast that you do want someone else to listen to.
Yes.
Because that's a big reason we're reviewing this, is because I listen to this, I'm like, oh no, you got sanity check, bro. Sanity check.
Sanity check. Yeah, get a buddy to listen to this with you. See who can follow it better. Maybe you can turn it into a game. Who can make more sense out of this podcast?
Hunter, what are you, my mom? Asking me, well, maybe if you do your homework the bestest, you'll have
Look, I just make a lot of things into games. I'm like, how could this be a competition or a series of mechanics to make things fun?
Yeah.
And I think you could listen to this with a friend and be like, who lost their mind less? Or more, depending on what you qualify as a win.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think we're in broad agreement. Good pod?
Good pod.
Anything else?
Critically? Meh. As far as a fun listen? Yeah.
Yes.
I would give it rating time. I would give it a time out of space-time continuum Not a lot of continuum. Hard to keep track of the space. But it's got freaking time travel. It's got time travel. Sam from the past is gonna put it in your pocket, don't worry. Wow, that banana looks gnarly.
It's a normal banana, dude.
That is not normal.
It would be great for banana bread. So, I think time out of space-time continuum.
Yeah.
Not particularly helpful rating.
I think it is.
I'm going to say 2.6 pods out of 5 pods. It's pretty average.
1/10 above average.
Yeah, I'm a pretty mild reviewer. Yeah, it's a pretty good pod. It's fun to listen to, but I agree it's a good thing to point out on it that this is not gonna win any awards, I don't think.
Yeah.
As far as audio dramas go, it's not much to dig into.
Yeah.
But it's a fun listen.
But it's
and
fun.
There's not that much of it. If you want an audio drama, I have a hard time finding them. Finding another really good one to dig into. There's so many bro talk shows with 5,000 episodes to listen to.
I also think you would have an easier time if you weren't opposed to like a podcast being more than 20 episodes. Because the good audio dramas are longer than that.
I would like it to finish in my lifetime, if at all possible. But, Honor?
Sam?
Thanks for podding with me.
Yeah.
This was a good pod we talked about. This was a good pod we made.
Yeah.
This is a good banana I'm eating right now.
I'm glad. It doesn't look like it, so...
It's a little mushy. Kind of regret leaving it in my pocket for so long.
Well, you can tell Sam about how weird his banana in his pocket is at podpodcastcast@gmail.com.
And, listener, please do let us... I want to put a call out for your podcast recommendations. Just more stuff to listen to. We're really excited about the kind of upcoming things that we want to talk about, but kind of as the future goes along, I want to hear more of what you guys are listening to. I want to get some more recommendations of my own. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of want to dig into some other pods, and I would love for you guys to let us know what you're listening to. And maybe it'll be featured on a future episode of Podpodcastcast.
Podpodcastcast. If you have anything that fits Sam's strict criteria of audio drama that is like 20 episodes or less, let us know.
You don't have to, but if you do let us know.
If you do, let us know.
Well, I would love to know other kinds of pods as well. You can also leave those recommendations in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
Yeah, buddy.
Dude, put anything in those 5-star reviews. They don't care. No one's listening. No one's looking down there, you know what I mean? The man can't stop you.
Yep.
You can put in your favorite, fetturedo alccine recipe.
What was that?
Everybody put in
fetturedo alccine.
Everybody put a 5-star review down there. Give us your fetturedo, whatever you think fetturedo alccine is. And we'll see you in the next episode of Podpodcastcast. Bye bye.